to another Reltio Community Show. If you've never been to one, we do these quite a bit, but we do have a special guest today. The topic today is MDM for R&D and IDPM compliance for life science companies. Really excited about this one because Neha Inamdar, hopefully I said that correctly, Neha-ish.
Yes, you got it.
Great. She's a managing director of client success from Fresh Gravity, one of Reltio's partners, and I am super excited that she's volunteered to do this, and so really fun here. And so the rules of the show before we do get started, just so you know, the lives or you are live, so you can take yourself off mute, but keep yourself on mute for now. All questions should hopefully be asked in the chat, or feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask your question directly. The show will be recorded and posted to the Reltio community after this. So I will send out a link and everything else to everyone after the show, probably tomorrow, because I will be off next week. So it will be tomorrow for sure. So before we do get started, we do have a few events coming up that we're excited about. So today we have one with Neha from Fresh Gravity. Really excited about that one. And then on the 13th of July, leading your data strategy with business outcomes. That will be with our Senior VP of Product, Vinky. And then on July 20th, increase productivity and improve CX with automated householding. Look, this is a very big feature that folks are very interested in. So we're super excited about this particular feature. And then on the 24th, we're also excited about this, is leveraging pre-trained machine learning models for efficient entity resolution. That's an exciting show that we have coming up as well. And just so you know, Reltio is a major sponsor of an event called Data Driven. It's on site October 3rd here in Dallas, Texas. I'm in Dallas. And that will be October 3rd through 5th. We have a really great lineup of keynote speakers and speakers that do this for a living all day, every day from a data management standpoint. So I will post some information in the chat after we get started about that event and some other stuff. So with that said, though, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Neha, and I'm going to let you go ahead and get started.
Thanks so much, Chris, and I'm incredibly excited to be here today. This will be my first at the Reltio community, presenting to the Reltio community, but super grateful for this community. I know a lot of Fresh Gravitians also get on the community, contribute, and get a lot from this community as well. So I'm very excited to be addressing this group. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So let me know when you can see it.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to begin with a quick introduction for myself. And this led me down a very existential questions life path. I was telling Chris earlier, when someone asked me to introduce myself, I'm simply thinking, who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? What's the meaning of life? All of those questions. But yeah, so primarily a data primarily a data enthusiast. Have been working in the data information management space for about 18 plus years now. Started off as a C# coder, just like any other engineering grad, and then went on to do business intelligence, data warehousing, and have been working across both for-profit as well as non-profit organizations through my career. I think one theme that has been constant throughout all of these stints has been love for data and being able to solve prickly business problems, also being able to work with people, different kinds of people, and having a more business first kind of approach for solving problems. So while I do work with a technology company as well as with Reltio a lot, but it's always what is the problem we're trying to solve, and therefore what's the right technology fit for it. And that's hopefully a theme you'll see throughout the conversation we're going to have today as well. Both of those things, the problem solving bit, the working with different types of people bit, leads me to my love of working in the life sciences domain, because abundance of both of those in the space as well. I've been working with Fresh Gravity for about 5 years now and spent a lot of time in the life sciences domain specifically. Outside of work, I am a mother to a 7-year-old who's obviously bouncing off the walls at all different points in time. I live in India. And yeah, I enjoy traveling and do a lot of road trips across India as well. So that's a quick introduction about myself. We'll get into the meat of the conversation today. So we're talking about data in the life sciences domain and talking about kind of what, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of business use cases and business problems that we're trying to solve for in the life sciences space. And working with a systems integrator such as Fresh Gravity, it gives us a sort of vantage point in terms of looking across multiple clients and the people that we work with and starting to pick at patterns and starting to look at what's a common problem area that we can create accelerators for, create solutions for, and how do we solve for those. So I'll kick off in terms of the life sciences domain. Everyone here is trying to work in pursuit of longevity and a healthier world. In terms of where pharma companies are at, typically divided into sort of 4 broad buckets or business units or functions, starting with research and development and preclinical trials, moving into clinical trials. And we've all become a lot more familiar with this life cycle as COVID has done multiple things. We also have the whole, once the trials are successful, you go into a registration and launch of your medicinal product and start selling it to a much broader audience. And then once it's out there in the world, there's a lot more in terms of pharmacovigilance and safety of the drug as well. So obviously this entire life cycle takes multiple years. Bringing a new drug into the market is an incredibly slow, tedious, and an expensive process. From a data standpoint, data is scattered across the organization, and most pharma companies also work with external partners, so CROs, research organizations, universities that do research, and so on, manufacturing organizations, a lot of different data being exchanged within the organization as well as across organizational boundaries. Industry is also currently reactive in the face of a lot of changing regulatory requirements and safety monitoring that comes up. And then there's obviously, because of a lot of money being spent and expertise being, expertise that is needed to stitch a lot of the data coming together across different business functions. So if we look at data silos within a life sciences company, and there can be good reasons for this, both from an operational efficiency standpoint, as well as from a regulatory standpoint. The perception is that you have different functions within an organization that do drug discovery, R&D, clinical trials, commercial, manufacturing, and regulatory, and they all have their own functions and they all have, what they need to get done. But if you look at it from a data standpoint, there's a lot of shared data across this entire universe, and there's a lot that goes across all of these different functions. So it's never just each in its own silo, but it has to come together because this is a lot of shared data across the board. That automatically, like I know I'm talking to a lot of MDM folks here as well, but immediately lends itself to solving some problems using master data management as a lever. So I'm going to focus today on two specific aspects. One is how are we looking at using master data management in the R&D and clinical space. And then the second bit is going to be focused on the IDMP regulation that Chris mentioned earlier in the introduction as well. So we're going to break up the conversation into those two, but this is kind of the foundation, and take this as you kind of move through the rest of the conversation. So if we think about business use cases in the R&D and clinical space, the main goals at this stage for any pharma company is to minimize the time taken to identify active ingredients or for specific therapeutic areas that they're working on. You want to minimize the time taken to conduct clinical trials, and you want to minimize trial failure because it's an expensive piece of work. So what kind of business cases are coming out of these goals? Identification of substances, like what is the substance that which is going to be the active ingredient in the medicinal product that you're going to ultimately manufacture. When you're running clinical trials, how are you choosing the right sites for running those trials? How are you choosing the right investigators? for running those trials. How are you going to accelerate the study, the time taken for study startup, as well as for running your entire studies? How feasible is the site at which you're going to run your studies? And how quickly are you able to onboard and recruit patients needed for the clinical trials as well? So these are very high level typical problem statements or business use cases, which again are going to stem from the different processes, business functions that happen within the R&D and clinical space. It's a complex world, but I think that the key questions that folks or business leaders are looking to answer in this space would be in the realm of some of these. And these are just some example illustrative questions. But things like, are there any planned studies or competitive studies going on at the sites that we are considering for our clinical trials? Does the site have enough qualified investigators and other clinical staff to run the entire trial successfully? What kind of infrastructure and facilities does the site have? What's been the kind of metrics or KPIs for these sites and investigators in the past? What kind of challenges, or have there been any red flags for any trials that have run over here in the past? Do we have enough information about the investigators, their credentials, their availabilities, their specialties, and whether they are also able to pull in the right profile of patients for running these trials? So lots of questions that can be answered if we are able to kind of bring together the data that lives within an R&D and clinical space. Now, these are also two different functions in many cases. How do we bring those together? How do we bring systems together to kind of talk to each other? So in our minds, this provides a very good use case for using master data management. So because we have separate data systems for every stage in the trial process, right? You have CTMS systems for your clinical trial management, clinical data management, the finance and reports and projects that you're running. Those are all different systems. You have different EDCs to capture results and capture what's happening with patients throughout the life cycle of a trial. Lab reports, lab notes from technicians, and there's also safety reporting that would happen throughout. There also might be unstructured data that again lives in documents like protocol documents, which completely define what's going to happen on a trial, how are the steps going to be run, what are the inclusion criteria, what are the exclusion criteria. That entire piece, and those typically run into hundreds of pages. They're all PDFs with no standard structure to any of them. But they contain very, very crucial information for both study running as well as ensuring that studies are coming to a successful conclusion. So all of this can become sources to an MDM system such as Reltio, where we're beginning to master specific entities, with the study being kind of at the center of this universe, and looking at which investigators, which sites, what indications, which subjects or patients, and what is the medicinal product and or substance that we're running the trial on. So this becomes a very good place for unifying the data from across all of these. The other piece that can be done and is very useful is bringing in enrichment data. So things like NPI numbers and other details about your investigators from more standard and regularly available global databases, other subscription data, data available in clinicaltrials.gov. There's a lot of enrichment data that can supplement what you already have within the organization. So an MDM-driven solution therefore helps to standardize data from these multiple sources, allows you to harmonize the data across different steps of the clinical trial management process, and also enrich with proprietary data, enrich your proprietary data with external data, whether it's competitor data, whether it's historical data about investigators or sites and so on. So there's a lot that can be brought together with MDM as the foundation. Now, these might seem like analytical data analytics questions, but unless your foundations are clear, it's very hard to run good analytics on it, as we all know. So MDM can form that foundation where your investigators and your studies or your substances from all of the multiple sources that you have can be brought together, harmonized, deduplicated, and be able to provide one sort of common definition for all the other processes going forward. And that obviously leads to better outcomes on analytics as well. So this is how we kind of see the, within the R&D and clinical space, these are some of the business use cases that MDM can help answer. Chris, are there any questions?
Not yet. No questions as of yet.
Okay, cool.
Can we ask a question now, or you want us to wait till the end?
Go for it. What's your question?
Now, investigator is very interesting, right? Investigator does not belong in the R&D of the clinical use case, but belongs in a customer domain, because obviously is some sort of a customer to a life science company.
From a commercial standpoint, yes.
Yeah, because he could be an HC, HCP, he could be playing a role of an investigator for this specific trial.
That's right.
What is the intent here? Is it to master investigators separately and master customers separately and then deduplicate them at some point?
So it's the same person, right? You have, when you think about
Right.
person 360 as well, it's the same person that's playing different roles in different contexts.
Right.
So Dr. Neha Inamdar can be a person that you are trying to sell your drug to in a commercial setup. But at the same time, I could be a very viable option for running a clinical trial that you have upcoming. So it's across the board, but my attributes, my descriptors are all the same. What I practice, what my specialty is, where am I located, what phone number do I have, what address do I have? All of those can be commonly utilized by both the commercial function as well as the R&D function. So that's what I mean by like the data silos that I was talking about. It is the same person. So it's about what context you are applying to that person, and how are you then saying, hey, this person's actually run trials for us in the past, but does this person become a good customer for me going forward? So it's about how you can look at it from a more enterprise kind of organizational standpoint versus looking at it purely from a commercial or an R&D standpoint.
No, I get it. Your intent for putting investigator here is to do what? To expand the silo or to reduce the silo?
To reduce the silo, but also if you have the right information, both about your past performance of that investigator, that's an input to your analytics for site intelligence or for your study. So how do you get to that point of saying, I have all this historical data about this person that has run trials in the past or has been a customer of my company. Now, is this a person I can leverage for the next thing that I need to do? So how can I narrow down my options, and how can I get to the best possible option for an investigator or for a site to run my study? And there's a lot of external kind of sources, data sources, Sightline, drug dev, which will allow you to look at and broaden your base of investigators as well, right? Who you work with. DEI becomes an important component nowadays as well, where you need to make sure that your trials are being run across a representative population and not just the one or the two that you may be falling back on in the past. So you won't know that until you bring this all together.
Yeah, and a couple of thoughts in the chat was, one is also the investigator might do multiple clinic trials, so this could help you measure the performance of the investigator over multiple trials.
Yeah,
and then one other comment is really like the HCP investigator may make sense to master the commercial or R&D individual in one place to support consent, privacy requirements, as well as benefit from enriching, validating via external source. So specifically our specialty and affiliations, et cetera. So in one place being charged only once. So
makes sense.
Yep. And making different views of that available to a different audience, but using that as a base for your analytics as well.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for the question. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think Fresh Gravity and Reltio's also come up with a velocity pack, which kind of includes some of these entities right now. So shout out to that team as well. I know our team has also worked alongside the Reltio product development team to provide feedback and put in what we have learned from different implementations. So that's a good starting point for this. And we've kind of then taken that and built out a slightly broader data model as well, which looks at what's the most common things that we need to master, what are the most common relationships, how does this get used over multiple clients. So that's a starting point.
So the value proposition of Fresh Gravity is expanding on building the clinical trial data management models. Is that the value proposition?
Yeah. So it's expanding, right? Like you can think dependent on what kind of business problem or use case you're looking
Right.
at, and building out a roadmap for what it could look like. So this is a picture of what the ultimate thing could look like, but how you get there can be in pieces.
Right. No, I understand that. But what are you providing to Reltio on top of the Reltio SaaS solution? What are the things you're providing out of the box that helps that acceleration?
So there's multiple, and I know this is also part of the Reltio product roadmap. So expanding to entities like study and product
Right.
and
Okay.
patient and all of those. Yeah. So building that out alongside Reltio. All right. I'll go to the next use case now. So we're talking about the regulatory use case, which is the IDMP use case. Very quickly, not sure if folks are familiar, but let me just give a quick background of what IDMP is. IDMP stands for Identification of Medicinal Products. It's essentially a suite of 5 standards developed by the ISO organization, and it provides an internationally accepted framework to uniquely identify your medicinal products. Now, this requires that there's a lot of standardization to the kind of data that you are tracking, maintaining, and creating, and sharing with regulatory authorities. So the FDA in the US and the European Medicines Agency in the EU have come up with 2 kind of frameworks. So on the left, you see the 5 main ISO standards, which are then identified into subject identification, medicinal product identification, pharmaceutical product identification, dosage form, routes of administration, and then units of measurement. So this is how the FDA kind of defines these standards. The EMA has taken a slightly different point of view, where they have built out a SPOR framework, which is basically an abbreviation of substance management services, product management services, organization management services, and referential management services. So the requirement is that if you are submitting, when you are submitting, not if, when you are submitting data to these agencies, that you are complying with what's provided in the ISO documentation, as well as what each regulatory agency is looking for from a standardization standpoint. So of the 4 right now, so the EMA is ahead of the curve at the moment, where they've already implemented the referentials management service, and this is available for pharma companies and life sciences clients to be looking at and accepting. So this is essentially a globally accepted list of values for different parts of data. The substance management service and the product management service is ongoing. The organization management services is also live and being used. So every time you have to make a submission to the EMA, your organization needs to show up in the list of organizations in this service. So unless you have that, you're not able to make the submission. So that requires a level of standardization and ensuring that you're providing the right information with each submission. So that's a little bit about IDMP. What IDMP allows, I think what Fresh Gravity is looking at from an IDMP standpoint is it's providing an opportunity for consolidation of data across the entire drug development value chain. Because IDMP touches each and every part of the 4 kind of blocks that I was showing earlier, it necessitates that these silos be broken and that data actually come together to generate it in a manner and in a format that is acceptable and standardized across the globe. So if you look at, it allows, so in our minds, how we think about it is that it is an opportunity for building a repository of enterprise-wide data assets. It's an opportunity for identifying improvements in your data quality and governance processes, and to view this as an enterprise architecture and not just as an R&D data set versus a commercial or versus a regulatory data set. And this is not just a function, IDMP is not just a function of the regulatory team within a pharma company. It's become a distributed responsibility across the entire organization, which means that for you to be IDMP compliant, your regulatory information management system, your clinical trial system, your substance data, your product data, your manufacturing data, your packaging data, your safety data, your referentials, and any other data that is spread out across the entire ecosystem, they need to follow a certain standard and they need to come together in a certain manner in order for you to be compliant and to be able to manage that data submission in that manner throughout the life cycle of a product. So therefore, then it becomes a very good place again for MDM to play a role, where essentially it becomes the holder and keeper of data from all of these different systems and begin to build out this entire IDMP picture in one place for an enterprise-wide view. It's a long process. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is it's a very worthy aspiration to have, is to be able to see your data assets in an enterprise manner that way, not just for IDMP compliance, but it immediately enables a lot of other use cases as well. So labels, for example, like right now, there is a disconnect between the supply chain data and the R&D data. So if there are safety concerns about a particular medication and your labels need to change, or a warning needs to be added to your labels, it needs to go through multiple steps because you have data living in your supply chain systems, in your labeling systems, but there is no good way of being able to connect that with your R&D data. Because think about it, it's the one substance that has gone through different life stages in a drug development life cycle. You started off as a substance which is going to play the role of an active ingredient. That moved into a clinical trial and more things got added to it. That moved into the commercial space and more data got added to it, more definitions got added to it. And that same medicinal product now is being sold, against which you need to be tracking your safety reports as well. So it's essentially the same thing moving through different life cycles. And so having a good view of how that product is connected to everything else in the organization, everything that a pharma company does essentially, becomes very crucial. And we think that, and we know that MDM can actually play a very important role in getting to that point. So what we've done is we've built a molecule to market data model, which is essentially a IDMP compliant data model, which is built on top of the Reltio system. So if you see the flow here, this is usual, right? Your MDM flow, where you have multiple internal sources within any pharma company for cross-functional data. You have enrichment sources similar to what I was showing in the clinical space. You have multiple reference data, and you also have multiple, you could have unstructured documents as well. So SMPC documents or ECTD documents or module 3 documents, which contain a lot of this information which is required for IDMP compliance, but sitting in unstructured PDFs. There is a way to then digitize those and bring them again into an MDM kind of framework, which then allows you to start making those connections. So we've kind of built this molecule to market data model, which is IDMP compliant. So we've looked at all the requirements from IDMP and built out a data model, which is on top of Reltio at the moment. So Reltio obviously provides a bunch of different connectors to get that data into Reltio, the usual MDM piece like profile relationships on top of that data model, everything that Reltio does, and none of you on this call will be new to this, but essentially all of that with data governance and stewardship on top of that leads us to be able to reach like about a 70-80% IDMP message, if I can call it that. There are a few other components which could come from other transactional systems, but then there is a way to put all of those together and then submit to regulatory agencies through your regulatory information management systems. So this is what we have built at the moment as an accelerator, as a solution to bring to the market and to sort of begin to align to what's required from an IDMP standpoint. So that's the molecule to market solution. So what
Neha,
essentially, yeah.
Can I ask a question real quick before we keep going? So in line with the questions from earlier, ideally we would need to master once and reuse the investigator and site in an enterprise, but it rarely happens. So R&D master investigator, study, site, and subject. So like commercial master customer, which is an investigator, product, which can be material or substance in R&D. So with IDMP, how can the deduplication be done? And how can we ensure that we get a deduplicated master for the analytics in the data lake? It's a big one.
Yeah, it's a good question as well. So I don't see this necessarily. I mean, there is some level of deduplication, but if you think about it, the R&D definition of a product contains the substances, it contains strengths of those substances, it contains things that the R&D team needs to ensure that you are coming up with a product that can be sold, trialed, and then sold. Once you've gone into the commercial space, you've added on more facets to that same thing where you've said, I now have a brand name for this. I now have a marketing authorization for this. I'm now able to sell this in XYZ regions. And I can only do this for ABC years. So I don't see it necessarily as a deduplication per se, but essentially you are building a sentence. So you're starting from 3 words, you're adding on more words, and you're kind of reaching a full stop at some point. So this kind of that linkage, like being able to create that message, is what MDM can help with. Now, in your commercial systems, you may not have an identifier that says, and that's what I was coming to with my next slide, where you can persist an identifier across this entire life cycle, right? So then there is a way for you to be able to uniquely connect what happened in R&D to what happened in commercial and sort of say, hey, this is the same thing. And so therefore we can kind of bring it together with different facets. So you're looking at a medicinal product, but with a slightly different view, similar to HCP, right? Similar to HCP in R&D versus commercial. You're looking at the same thing, but with a slightly separate slant in R&D and a slightly different slant in commercial. So it's again the same product, but if you've made these connections, you know that a pharmaceutical product, which is essentially paracetamol of, I don't know, 650 mg strength, that was sold as an Advil in the US, but it was sold as a Dolo in India, or whatever other brand names were used for that same composition. So you now have that relationship in an MDM type system where all the IDs can come together. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think that was a good answer. So thank you.
Okay. All right. So the way this can work is essentially generating unique identifiers throughout the life cycle. And unless you do that, there's really no way to connect these pieces together. So in your R&D development and preclinical, you have your targets databases, you have indications databases and substance databases. Through all of the work that your scientists will do, you will identify a lead and optimize that to take further into a clinical trial as an active ingredient. Now, this active ingredient then can generate a unique substance ID, which will then persist through this entire life cycle of that particular medicinal product. The same way, once this substance gets into your investigational and clinical trial processes, an investigational drug ID is created, which also then moves, once this is successful, it moves on to add on another ID as a medicinal product, as well as a pharmaceutical product. This becomes a slightly different representation of that same investigational drug that you were trialing in your clinical trials. You have a trade name that comes in, a brand name, and different regions where you're going to sell this. And so these IDs then persist throughout the life cycle of that product as well. So essentially, all of this then allows you to be able to run analytics from one end of the spectrum to the other end and be able to do interesting things with it and be able to solve for interesting problems going forward. IDMP being just one of the use cases that you're solving by bringing in this structure. It's not easy, it's complicated, but this is kind of the where you can get and what you could do. So what is the art of the possible with this kind of a point of view? So essentially, the entities that would be mastered within this molecule to market piece that I was talking about, from the R&D space, you're looking at active substances, targets, drug binding actions. Then you move into clinical trials and you're looking at study, investigator, sponsor, site, and subject. Then you're moving into commercialization, where all of those other, the brand names, the organizations, the manufacturers, labelers, the marketing authorizations, the regulatory bodies that you're submitting to, what kind of packaging materials are you using, what kind of devices are you using. And then we get into the sort of last piece of the real world evidence of pharmacovigilance, where adverse events are being reported. So this entire gamut helps you look at everything in a connected manner. Now, is everything required per ISO or per IDMP? No. So you can prioritize if that is where you want to head. You could prioritize what you bring into MDM at what point. You could also say, you want to go just with your authorized medicinal products versus your investigational, or you can start off saying, no, I want to start all the way from R&D and then move into commercial. So there are different ways of tackling this and the different ways of attacking this based on priorities, based on where the organization is at with respect to moving in the direction of IDMP, because there's a lot of change management as well with this. There's a lot of data governance with this. There's a lot of data quality with this. So depending on where each organization is at, you can choose to tackle this starting from anywhere, but eventually get to this broader picture, which will get you to many more business problems, solving many more business problems. So just the ones that are highlighted here on the slide are the ones which are required for like the ISO standards, for the ISO standards for IDMP compliance. I will pause and see if there's any questions, Chris.
No questions as of yet. Just one question was, do we get a recording of the session? Actually, and so I said yes. And so I put the link there, so you can keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is kind of what I had from a slide standpoint. I did have one more. If do we have the time, Chris? I'm not sure where we're at.
We do. Yep.
So I was going to end here, but we can go further. So in terms of how the MDM kind of approach to IDMP, just wanted to provide like an illustrative use case and what the data flows might look like, just to picturize and to evaluate if other folks are thinking about this. But if you're thinking about a situation where this is an event of a single submission or marketing authorization submission for a product, this is a new first-time submission that you're submitting to the EMA, for example. You've prepared whatever the CTD documents are, the submission documents are, and your MDM system has contributed to the creation of these submissions. There are other transactional systems also that have contributed to these submissions. You're submitting this to the EMA say no, might say no, and you have to reevaluate. They might say yes, and then what happens is you receive your initial marketing authorization. At this point, the EMA is creating multiple IDs, such as the product master, the product management services ID, the medicinal product ID, the packaging ID. And these are expected to stay constant. The PMS ID is expected to stay constant throughout the life cycle of the entire product. So all of these statuses can get updated into MDM. They can all be captured in MDM. And you can also send them back to transaction systems if you so desire. So this is kind of the flow. What happens is in your MDM, you have these different entities. You have an ingredient, you have an organizational entity which calls out which company it is, what the medicinal product entity looks like. It has a PMS ID which is blank, an MP ID which is blank, a name which has been given. There's a product name entity as well. So it's being sold as Sunosi as the brand for tablet of oral use 75 mg. This is a 14 tablet blister pack. This is a 28 tablet blister pack, for example, with aluminum as the packaging. Now, data after a submission was received, these are the IDs that were received from the regulators. And so now you can go back and update these in the right places into your MDM. So you're holding on to these IDs in one place. And then every change that you have to the medicinal product definition, whether it's you're changing your ingredients, your dosage forms, you're changing packaging from aluminum blister pack to plastic blister pack, any other legal statuses, anything that's changing, they can all be tracked in one place for traceability. So these can be different submissions that have happened. So if you have the initial MA, these are the IDs. You've added a new manufacturer and nothing changes here because no IDs need to change with a new manufacturer. But now you've transferred the marketing authorization to a different organization and your IDs change. You've changed the primary packaging and those IDs change as well. So MP ID changes, your packaging ID as well changes. So these changes in a historical context can be maintained and aggregated on a Reltio MDM type system where you have the lineage of what has changed, when has it changed, and you're able to track back exactly if something were to come back. So each of these IDs can be tracked back and maintained and aggregated in one place. So yeah, so that was just a very quick illustration of how this might look like in practice, and how you might utilize an MDM system to get to a point like this.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? I didn't see any other specific questions that Neha can address. Well, for now, I'm going to say that's a no, but feel free to chime in, folks. Hubert, did you have something?
I just wanted to say
Hi, Hubert.
I just wanted to say fab presentation as always, and well thought.
Thank you so much.
Just reflecting that.
So good to see you.
Unfortunately, I will have to dash to another meeting. Crazy day.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming. And this will be recorded, and actually is recorded now, and I'll send it out by tomorrow. But I put the link directly into the chat to where you can actually get it.